D, what race is Heathcliff supposed to be? I don't, maybe race is not the correct word. Of what ethnic origin is that character supposed to be?
Going into it, based on what I had read online before I read the book, I understood that Heathcliff was definitely somebody who didn't look white and was most likely someone of Romani origin. However, upon reading the book, my identity as a Black British Caribbean person, I don't know, maybe it's just the lens through which I understand British history. It gave me like a pretty solid conclusion that I believe Heathcliff is a mixed race Black man. First of all, there's only one correct answer here, which is that if you're reading the book, we don't know. Heathcliff's race is basically anyone who doesn't look like a white Englishman of that time, right? So all we can do is speculate. But I found no less than 10 clues that could point to the fact that he is somebody who's mixed race and was in some way involved in the slave trade, right?
So no less than 10 is crazy.
No, seriously, no less than 10. So if I highlight the most prominent ones, right? Obviously, the big one is that he was found in Liverpool. Okay, so Liverpool was the center. Yeah, it was the center of Black, what would have been, what you could argue is like Black British life at that time. There were Black people there who were unfortunately being traded through the ports, but also there were Black freemen there. Also, we have all sorts of descriptions about his skin color being darker. Okay, now this is the reason why I'm saying that I believe that he would have been mixed race, because I think if Heathcliff looked like you and I, for example, there would have been references to his hair and there would have been references to very dark skin, but we don't get that. There was also a very interesting comment about how he could have been, again, this is one of the many guesses about where this guy could come from. One of the guesses is that he was a Spanish or an American castaway. And you can interpret that to be someone who was trafficked, like a Black person of African descent that was trafficked by the slave routes. Also, Ellen mentioned something about you were kidnapped by wicked sailors and brought to England. Again, who's been kidnapped and brought to England historically at that time, right? But I think some of the more convincing arguments are related to the conversations that were going on about slavery abolition at the time. So
because of the Brontes.
Yeah, exactly. And the Brontes were actually linked to many abolitionists at that time. So when I look at all of this together, another one as well is that he only has one name. So something that's quite common when it comes to slavery in the Caribbean, for example, is that there are a lot of slaves who didn't have two names. They didn't have a first name and a last name. They just had one name. So I find it very interesting. Yeah. So I found it really interesting that Heathcliff just has one name. And then I think the final one is that he was very hardened to beatings. I found it interesting that he was being hit and he wasn't really responding to that. But again, that could also be the kind of demon way that the book was trying to portray the character. So yeah, long story short, I still think the correct answer is that we simply do not know what his race is, but we do know that he's not white in the sense that he wouldn't have blended into British culture at that time. And although there are other guesses about, like, he could be Romani, he could be, this is a slur now, but he was a gypsy, or I know there were some potential cases for him being Irish and stuff like that. But the only evidence I have seen from the book about him belonging to any of those ethnicities are the guesses that come from characters in the book, and all of those characters acknowledge that they don't really know where he comes from. So when I looked at all the context together, I'm like, actually, I think the strongest case is that he's probably someone who's of mixed African background. What did you think?
I think that's a really, really good breakdown. You've actually slightly adjusted my view of Heathcliff with what you just said. That makes a very strong case that he's a biracial Black. He's a child of Kathy's father and an enslaved woman. Or he's just some kidnapped enslaved boy. However, that's not how I interpret Heathcliff. But with this conversation, with what you've just said, maybe you've actually changed my opinion. But up to this point, to me, he was quite unambiguously a Romani boy. And the reason for that was because, and maybe this is also a thing about like our socialization, right? As a Caribbean Black British person, you have some additional ways of viewing how people view you as race that's a bit different from mine. To me, if he was Black, I would know he was Black from the storytelling. That's to me. To me, like, within African identity, like, whiteness is completely separate from us. Now, I understand that in the UK versus America, one drop rule wasn't quite the same thing. So perhaps it's not quite as extreme as how it would have been in America. However, I just struggle to believe that if this was a character that could in any way be coded as what would have been Negro at the time, that none of the characters would ever say it. I really, that's what really gives me pause with the whole
But
idea.
let me give
Go
you a
on.
contemporary example, right? We all saw what happened with Meghan Markle, myself included. Somebody who's black, I have many mixed race people around me. I have mixed race people in my family. When I saw Meghan Markle, I didn't see anything pointing to African ancestry. I literally thought she was Greek, right? So what
Greek
I'm
is
saying is,
crazy.
Heathcliff could easily be someone like a Meghan Markle, and I get what you're saying about the one drop rule, but the fact that passing exists means that there are people who have African ancestry who were able to navigate certain spaces, and no one, they were even thinking they were white, much less
But
Romani or
but
something.
then this goes to what are Romani people?
Yeah.
Because to me, what you just said is not mutually exclusive with being Romani, because
Mm-hmm.
Romani people have a combination of origins from Southeast Asia, what was quote unquote Moorish areas, some Irish
Yeah.
areas, sometimes North Africa, which included black people. So I don't. I'm not saying that this is a character that doesn't have possibility of having African ancestry. I'm
Mm.
just not sure I see him as a character with an obvious black like parents, for example. Um, Another thing is the language around Lascar specifically that is used is such a culturally specific terminology that I'm like, would a white person view a person that could be coded in any way as black and describe them with the language that is Lascar is not even just like a racial term, it's like a career term that is specifically for Indian people and South Asian people. Now, white people in that time that were talking were racist. So they can look at something that is just other and just be like, oh, you just look like this other
Yeah.
other that I know about.
Maybe
So
they
I
just read
understand
about
that
that
that's
word that day.
I do understand that there's a strong possibility that's happening.
Mm.
I don't know, but I'm just not convinced that a character that has blackness, that characters would repeatedly call him the slur that starts with a G. They would be calling him another slur. That's my thing with Heathcliff. But one thing, of course, I'm in 100% agreement with Heathcliff is not a white man. Obviously, clearly not.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, everything you've just said to me, the stuff with the first names, the stuff with the whippings, the Liverpool stuff, which I did also know about, it's swaying me towards the biracial black man thing. I see the vision. I get what you guys are saying. I know that obviously enslaved people were being brought to the port in Liverpool. What happened with the indentured servants? Did they
As in
come to a
Asian
separate
people.
place? Yes.
Yeah. That's a good question. Very likely. I mean, here's the other thing though.
Mm.
I will give some like a counter argument to my position, right? Liverpool wasn't just a slave port. Slavery was so profitable as a business. That money turned into other forms of business and it's still a port at the end of the day. So yes, it's very possible that it was a hub for various people who are not English at that time. So I'm not for a second implying that Heathcliff must be a Caribbean person, but what I'm really arguing is like, again, when people are saying very confidently that Heathcliff is Romani, Heathcliff is South Asian because of the last style comment, to me, that's giving far too much credit to an 1800s Yorkshire-based person who's literally guessing, and they're all literally admitting that I'm just guessing who this guy is because I don't know him. And what I have found, at least leveraging my experience and what I understand about Black British history at that time, I see far more context clues that are pointing to this particular ancestry compared to any of the other ones. And maybe that's just because I'm ignorant, right? Because I don't know everything about Romani culture, and I would love to hear more from people who are educated about that history. But yeah, I just don't see any other context clues pointing to a Romani history.
There's also that comment about, his face went white, his face paled white or something like that. Now I know that that can be a metaphorical term that, even a dark skinned person, if they're shocked, you could say like, oh,
Yeah.
like their face went gray. But I still was like, I don't know if I can view this as a black person. But I get what you're saying. On the subject of casting, I'm biased. I love Dev Patel. Dev Patel has been a fan cast for Heathcliff since I was young. I would have loved a Dev Patel Heathcliff. I think if they had cast a black or biracial person, they would have cast Reggie John Page. That's who she would have cast. And I don't like him as an actor.
So again, that's why I'm being very deliberate in how I'm describing Heathcliff, right? I don't believe that Heathcliff had curly hair, and he does. Because if Heathcliff had like afro hair, people would have been commenting about it. So the lack of those sorts of comments tells me that it's more of a Meghan Markle situation. These sorts of mixed race people who basically they could pass, is what I'm saying.
Like a Rashida Jones situation. Is there also a possibility that, because one thing that keeps happening with Emily Brontë in this book is the innuendo, because she was writing it as a young unmarried woman in the 1700s or 1800s, whatever it was, and she came from a pro-abolitionist family, but like there's still certain politics around her. So there's a lot of things, from the taboo about the incest to the sensuality to the spirituality, that is subtext there. So I guess an argument for Heathcliff being actually a biracial black man or a mixed race black man is that she was never going to say it explicitly, because if she did, the concept of making the protagonist of your novel a black man would have immediately shut her out. Because there's other things she did to dance around it. Like, you know, she was writing under pseudonyms to sound like a man. She's very carefully implying that they're half siblings without ever really saying it. So
the lack of sex
I
as
also
well.
see that argument. The lack of sex as well. I do see that argument.
We have the Heathcliff element about what is his race, right? But I want to call out the other two characters that are race swapped in this film.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Right? So I'm not going to lie to you. I'm actually getting to a point where I feel like this film is low-key racist. Okay? Ooh. Because we know why Heathcliff was cast as a white man. Emerald Fennell has come out and told us that basically she couldn't fathom a brown love interest. So that's the reason why we have Jacob.
Wait,
Elordi.
what?
Fine.
I'm not sure that's what she said.
She said in the interview that everyone has to make the film that they can imagine, right? So if you're telling me that you can't imagine a brown Heathcliff, what are you telling me? Right? So we have that part. But I find it very interesting that she doesn't think that black or brown people can be a love interest. Again, ain't no black people trying to claim Heathcliff like that. I think that he's a demon in this book. Like, I'm not, it doesn't add to my life if Heathcliff is black or not, right? I'm not trying to claim Heathcliff. But it's interesting that, like, she's portraying him as a love interest in this film. So it's okay to have white people in that role, but black and brown people, it's okay for them to be cast as the two unlikable characters in this film, i.e. the villain, or at least who the film wants me to believe is the villain, which is Nelly. You deliberately cast her as an Asian woman, even though there is absolutely no evidence in the book that she was anything other than a white Yorkshire woman. And then secondly, you decide to cast someone who should have been playing Heathcliff as a husband who is boring, has lame pipe game, and she can't wait to just get away from him.
Did you clock that he's our fave from Profile?
Oh my god, I didn't clock that that's him.
It's him.
He's good looking. Why? And what I don't like about this film as well, that's a very good looking man. Why have they made him look like, I'm not going to say he was looking ugly, but he wasn't looking as beautiful as he usually looks in this film. It's deliberate.
It's deliberate.
Do you get what I'm saying? So when you add all of that up together, I'm just like, this is getting very suspicious. And that's before I start to address the Gone with the Wind references.
I have a more generous read of it than you, even though I do find it strange that they re-swapped those characters but made Heathcliff Jacob Elordi as well. I don't view Nelly or Edgar as villains. I've never viewed Edgar as the villain in the book. And I don't think he's presented in any way as one in the film, even though he is perhaps presented as a limp dick. But that's what he always was.
He's like
as
lame.
for the Nelly, he's lame. But that's always been the case, though.